With us now to talk about regional amateur sports efforts in our region, we have Todd Johnson, and Todd is the Executive Director of the Minnesota Amateur Sports Commission. And we have from the Minnesota Curling Association, we have John Benton. Todd, John, thanks for joining us on Compass.
Great to be here.
I just think this is a terrific subject to talk about because a few years ago, who would have thought that we would have seen a curling club started in Willmar? And I know that, John, you have an amazing history in working in curling. So why is curling suddenly taking off?
Well, I think, Les, that the Olympics obviously is having a huge impact. The exposure that we've gotten through the last 3 Olympic cycles really is the main reason. The other thing is that it's an everyman sport, right? It's something that people see and they say, I could do that. When they come out and actually try it, they realize that maybe we make it look a little easier than it is. But I really think the fact that you can play the game for your entire life, just like golf, it's easily accessible and it's affordable, really make it attractive to people.
And when people see curling on television too, they also see that there's a social aspect to it as well, because there's a family-friendly aspect to people watching it, stepping aside, watching it again. So seems to be a nice sort of community atmosphere to it as well.
There is, and that's a big thing with curling is that it's a community and a family-based sport. There's a lot of legacy families that participate in the sport, and it's actually tradition after every game that you go back inside the warm room and you sit down with the team that you played against and have a beverage and talk over the game. So it has that huge social aspect to it that is really attractive to people.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. And Todd, I'd like to bring you into the conversation because in your job with the Minnesota Amateur Sports Commission, curling is one of the many things that you have to have some responsibility for. But in the break there, we were talking about the Amateur Sports Commission is actually statewide, but also has an economic development piece.
Right. Well, thank you, first of all, for being here, and this is a great opportunity. Not only am I running the Minnesota Amateur Sports Commission, I'm a ranger, so I grew up with my parents curling in the Hibbing Curling Club, but then my father moved out here and was a school superintendent in Dawson, and believe me, when we moved from the Iron Range to here, I'm sure he would have liked to continue his curling game, which they looked at as sort of bowling. I mean, they loved it. It was something my mom and dad did together. Clearly not competitive as our friend here at the table. But the Minnesota Amateur Sports Commission really was the vision of Governor Rudy Perpich in 1987, and what he saw was the opportunity to use sport as an economic development tool. And at that time, he started putting together ways to do the infrastructure to make a bid for the 1996 Olympics. And most people don't realize, but Minnesota missed out by 3 votes to Atlanta for those games. So that is what I oversee as well up in Blaine, as some of those buildings that were constructed at the time for that purpose. But the real mission is to give Minnesotans opportunity for sport, but also to create economic development.
And I expect, because most people look at amateur sports in their own community, they're often not aware, Todd, of how many other places there are. I mean, Marshall has a new hockey arena. We're talking about curling in Willmar. So, I mean, we're talking about regional facilities over the last 25 years all over the state.
Yeah, the Minnesota Amateur Sports Commission is a statewide board appointed by the governor and the legislature, and with a real blueprint for creating epicenters of sport throughout the state. You just mentioned Marshall. We don't run those facilities as the Amateur Sports Commission, but we help facilitate the bonding so they can get built.
And I suppose what you've seen in your sport, John, is as people get together and they go to tournaments, wherever they go, they're spending money, of course, on hotels and meals and activities. But I think what's interesting to watch in this is it's also very much often about families. And we talk about how families can come together in your sport and many others. It's a lot about families, isn't it?
It is. And you talked a little bit about traveling and hotels and economic impact. I mean, whether it's a hockey tournament or a curling bonspiel, as we call it, typically, especially when the kids go out, it's not just the kids, obviously. It's the families, it's friends to go watch, and they're all, spending the money at the hotels and at restaurants in whatever community that they're in. And I don't think we really talk about that enough, right? We see a lot of results and we talk about, the accolades of the athletes, but it really means a lot to communities to invest in projects that will draw those kinds of events, whether it's curling or any other sport, because really all of these sports do involve family, and to me, that's how you continue the growth in these sports and thereby create more economic development, is keeping families involved and creating those legacy groups to continue. And no matter where I go in the world, the sport of curling is really the same. It does have that social aspect and really does have that family feel to it. You know, you'll very often see parents bringing their kids in to try the sport when they're 4 or 5 years old. And the neat thing, just to talk about curling for a second, and what I see great in curling, especially for kids, is that unlike any other sport, when you put kids out on the ice to curl, they're out on the ice for 2 hours without any coach interaction. So that those social skills that they need to build to relate to their peers and other people, they really get an opportunity to do that without any sort of intervention whatsoever. So it's a fun thing to watch within our sport, and I've been a great benefactor of that.
Sure. And of course, you know, Todd, you talked about, you know, your family was in curling and, you know, had many different, but with your job right now, where you're seeing some changes in sports as well, a lot more interested in not only curling but individual sports as well, right, at the state level.
It's pretty incredible, state and national level. The research showing that the fastest growth in sport right now are individual sports and non-traditional sports.
Such as?
Well, literally fitness is huge, but cycling and I'm drawing a blank on a few of the others, but it's really interesting that that's where folks are gravitating, and the research showing some of that is coming from pressure and cost. So where there are activities and opportunities to participate in sport, I think what would be a nice analogy with what's going on is the growth in skeet and trap shooting, and it's probably flourishing out here and near the refuge, and where I spent some time up there.
High school shooting, trap shooting teams.
It's really taken off. We at the Sports Center were a founding member of the First Tee program for golf. Most people don't realize that we actually have a golf course at Blaine. It's the only PGA Tour designed public course in the state, but it is unique in that it has 6 tee boxes. So you can play with your son or daughter or grandchild they play at 2,000 and you play at, if you play the tips, you play from 7,000, or if you're me, you back it up a little bit to 5,000, and it becomes a wonderful sport. And we had 10,000 youth rounds of golf last year. And what we try to do is to complement that with team sport. So I think, you know, we've talked with the curling club just down the street. You can discuss a little bit. It's just astounding, the growth in this sport. I think the club membership between Eden Prairie, and I know I live in St. Paul, and right down on Selby Avenue is one of the largest curling clubs in America, and there is a real interest in it, and it just seems that it's our duty as the Amateur Sports Commission and to facilitate opportunities. We bring kids from the inner city up to Blaine to give them chances, and one of the really neat things, it doesn't work quite so much with a sport like curling, but is to give them employment opportunities through reffing, and we just sent out 2,000 990s, for youth to get leadership opportunities through reffing and coaching, and it's a really important thing.
Yeah. Well, and of course, it sounds like so some of this is also about, you know, people may not realize some of the barriers that are still there. Yep. For families or for low-income kids or low-income families, that there are some barriers for them to get into sports. And a lot of what's going on, I think, in the amateur sports world seems to be reducing barriers and, in some cases, shifting emphasis to some of these other sports like curling or cycling. And I'm sure you're seeing that you're seeing more families, more interest that crosses socioeconomic lines.
Yeah, one of our taglines at the facility is affordable community athletics. So again, tie back to family, but really drive operating costs down at facilities. You know, our facility in particular, to make ice costs cheaper, so that the association isn't having to charge the kids so much to play hockey, or having to charge so much in league fees for curling, so that you can get access. Equipment is insanely expensive these days for whatever sport you're participating in. So those are all the kinds of things that we're having to think about to suggest, you know, you can get into this sport at a relatively low cost and take some of that expendable income and introduce your kids or your family to something brand new that you could do for a lifetime.
And so I think some of this seems to be also about, finding the joy of being in sports together and just the participation.
Yeah, the Aspen Institute has got some interesting research on just that. I mean, the decline in team sports is measurably. It's and one of the things they talk about is making it fun again, making it affordable, and just taking away some of the pressure. You talked about specialization, critical. On the drive today, I was talking to an orthopedic sports medicine expert. Repetitive stress from just doing one sport is a problem. Look at Joe Mauer. I mean, he played 3 sports. I think the emphasis should go back to finding complementary sports. Sure, I'm a baseball, hockey guy. You love those sports, but you need complementary things to do that take some of the stress off your body.
Yeah. So, as you see the landscape of amateur sports, both curling and for many other sports, what are those things that we think is ahead in the state of Minnesota for amateur sports? We've obviously seen a few more hockey arenas, a few more other sports. What's ahead? And Todd, I'd like to start with you on this.
I think we need to really do some serious metrics on what we need. I mean, I think, as you said, the cost. Most people don't realize ice hockey is a good example, and people gasp at it's $200 an hour now to rent an hour of ice. Well, it's really $400 to operate an ice rink. So we've made a public policy decision as a state, and in many of our communities, these are community facilities. There's not a single for-profit sheet of ice making it in Minnesota. It was a public policy decision that we're going to make these facilities available, and we really need to play a role in making sure that there are opportunities for everyone then. I mean, that we administer grant programs. One was Title IX issues of getting, there wasn't enough ice 10, 15 years ago when young girls and women started to play the sport. It's right for the legislature and for legislative leaders and politicians to step in and let's have the debate. Yeah. It's a public policy decision about making sure these facilities are available and what is the role in government in doing that.
Yeah. John, for your sport?
Well, I think, one of the things that I've seen in the past 5 years just in my role at the facility is that the idea of multi-use facilities is probably at the forefront of my mind. Much like the Sports Center or our facility, where you have multiple opportunities, golf, hockey, soccer, the idea of a specialized center for single sport, it just doesn't make much sense anymore. And we have the advantage now of having a restaurant facility associated with it to bring in revenue streams into the nonprofit piece to make it go. I think that, whether it's in Willmar or anywhere else outstate, I think would be important to look at, tying into community center projects, those types of things, to really maximize your footprint and make it affordable at a base level rather than these specialized centers.
If I may, one quick point on that, and I think it's really incumbent upon us as leaders in sport to try to dovetail and bridge a couple of different things. And I can't help myself, because my father was a public school superintendent, to look at any opportunity, because actually you can see the research on if you do a CAT scan and see what's going on inside of a stimulated brain from sport activity, it's pretty amazing map that you see up there. And it's places like us, we're looking at the potential, and it worked perfectly with curling, is to combine language, foreign language training for kids with that sport. Okay. Kids are all different. I've got one who's grinding away pre-med. I got another one who thinks he's still going to be a professional baseball player. I could get him to learn Spanish if he was playing baseball at the same time. Similarly, you could probably do the same with French. And how do you combine the two?
Yeah. I'd love to have this conversation go on, but I'm afraid we're out of time. But this has been terrific. Todd Johnson, Amateur Sports Commission, and John Benton.
Thank you.
Curly. Thank you very much. And John and Todd, of course, that was a wonderful discussion, but that's it for this week on the topic of amateur sports in rural areas. We'll have our Compass producer, Laura K. Prosser, take it from here and end this week's episode with the next installment of the Compass Literature Corner. Thanks for watching.